Okay, guys, we were reading from the NRSA Bible, the Deuteronomical section on 1 Maccabees 9 through 12. We're going to try to do today. The lighting is weird. Hang on. Okay, that's better. Okay. Maccabees. 1 Maccabees 9, verse 12. 9 through 12, sorry. 1 Maccabees 9. When Demetrius heard that Nicanor and his army had fallen in battle, he sent Bachides and Alchemists into the land of Judah a second time, and with them the right wing of the army. They went by the road that leads to Gilgal and encamped against Masaloth and Arbela, and they took it and killed many people. In the first month of the 152nd year, they encamped against Jerusalem. Then they marched off and went to Berea with 20,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavalry. Now Judas was encamped in Elasa, and with him were 3,000 picked men. When they saw the huge number of the enemy forces, they were greatly frightened, and many slipped away from the camp until no more than 800 of them were left. When Judas saw that his army had slipped away and the battle was imminent, he was crushed in spirit, for he had no time to assemble them. He became faint, but he said to those who were left, "Let us get up and go against our enemies. We may have the strength to fight them." But they tried to dissuade him, saying, "We do not have the strength. Let us rather save our own lives now, and let us come back with our kindred and fight them. We are too few." But Judas said, "Far be it from us to do such a thing as to flee from them. If our time has come, let us die bravely for our kindred and leave no cause to question our honor." And the army of Bachides marched out from the camp and took its stand for the encounter. The cavalry was divided into two companies, and the slingers and the archers went ahead of the army, as did all the chief warriors. Bachides was on the right wing, flanked by the two companies. The phalanx advanced to the sound of the trumpets, and the men with Judas also blew their trumpets. The earth was shaken by the noise of the armies, and the battle raged from morning until evening. Judas saw that Bachides and the strength of his army were on the right. Then all the stout-hearted men went with him, and they crushed the right wing, and he pursued them as far as Mount Azoustus. When those on the left wing saw that the right wing was crushed, they turned and followed close behind Judas and his men. The battle became desperate, and many on both sides were wounded and fell. Judas also fell, and the rest fled. Then Jonathan and Simon took their brother Judas and buried him in the tomb of their ancestors at Modin, and wept for him. All Israel made great lamentation for him. They mourned many days and said, "How is the mighty fallen, the Savior of Israel?" Now the rest of the acts of Judas and his wars and the brave deeds that he did and his greatness have not been recorded, but they were very many. After the death of Judas, the renegades emerged in all parts of Israel. All the wrongdoers reappeared. In those days, a great famine occurred, and the country went over to their side. Bachides chose the godless and put them in charge of the country. They made inquiry and searched for the friends of Judas and brought them to Bachides, who took vengeance on them and made sport of them. So there was great distress in Israel, such as had not been since the time that prophets ceased to appear among them. Then all the friends of Judas assembled and said to Jonathan, "Since the death of your brother Judas, there has been no one like him to go against our enemies and Bachides, and to deal with those of our nation who hate us. Now, therefore, we have chosen you today to take his place as our ruler and leader to fight our battle." So Jonathan accepted the leadership at the time in place of his brother Judas. When Bachides learned of this, he tried to kill him. But Jonathan and his brother Simon and all who were with him heard of it, and they fled into the wilderness of Tekoa and camped by the water of the pool of Asphar. Bachides found this out on the Sabbath day, and he with all his army crossed the Jordan. So Jonathan sent his brother as leader of the multitude and begged the Nabateans, who were his friends, for permission to store with them the great amount of baggage that they had. But the family of Jambri from Medeba came out and seized John and all that he had and left with it. After these things, it was reported to Jonathan and his brother Simon, "The family of Jambri are celebrating a great wedding and are conducting the bride, a daughter of one of the great nobles of Canaan, from Nadabath, with a large escort." Remembering how their brother John had been killed, they went up and hid under cover of the mountain. They looked out and saw a tumultuous procession with a great amount of baggage, and the bridegroom came out with his friends and his brothers to meet with them with tambourines and musicians and many weapons. Then they rushed on them from the ambush and began killing them. Many were wounded and fell, and the rest fled to the mountain, and the Jews took all their goods. So the wedding was turned into mourning, and the voice of their musicians into a funeral dirge. After they had fully avenged the blood of their brother, they returned to the marshes of the Jordan. When Bacchides heard of this, he came with a large force on the Sabbath day to the banks of the Jordan. And Jonathan said to those with him, "Let us get up now and fight for our lives, for today things are not as they were before. For look, the battle is in front of us and behind us. The water of the Jordan is on this side and on that. With marsh and thicket, there is no place to turn. Cry out now to heaven that you may be delivered from the hands of our enemies." So the battle began, and Jonathan stretched out his hand to strike Bacchides, but he eluded him and went to the rear. Then Jonathan and the men with him leaped into the Jordan and swam across to the other side, and the enemy did not cross the Jordan to attack them. And about 1,000 of Bacchides' men fell that day. Then Bacchides returned to Jerusalem and built strong cities in Judah, the fortress in Jericho and Emmaus, and Beth-horon and Bethel, and Timnath and Pharethon, and Tephon, with high walls and gates and bars. And he placed garrisons in them to harass Israel. He also fortified the town of Beth-zur in Garza and the citadel, and in them he put troops and stores of food. And he took the sons of the leading men of the land as hostages and put them under guard in the citadel at Jerusalem. In the 153rd year, in the second month, Alchemists gave orders to tear down the wall of the inner court of the sanctuary. He tore down the work of the prophets, but he only began to tear it down, for at that time Alchemist was stricken and his work was hindered. His mouth was stopped and he was paralyzed, so that he could no longer say a word or give commands concerning his house. And Alchemist died at that time in great agony. When Bacchides saw that Alchemist was dead, he returned to the king, and the land of Judah had rest for 2 years. Then all the lawless plotted and said, "See, Jonathan and his men are living in quiet and confidence. So now let us bring Bacchides back, and he will capture them all in one night." And they went and consulted with him. He started to come with a large force and secretly sent letters to all his allies in Judea, telling them to seize Jonathan and his men, but they were unable to do it because their plan became known. And Jonathan's men seized about 50 of the men of the country who were leaders in this treachery and killed them. Then Jonathan went with his men, and Simon withdrew to Beth-Bazzi in the wilderness. He rebuilt the parts of it that had been demolished, and they fortified it. When Bacchides learned of this, he assembled all his forces and sent orders to the men of Judea. Then he came and encamped against Beth-Bazzi. He fought against it for many days and made machines of war. But Jonathan left his brother Simon in the town while he went out in the country, and he went with only a few men. He struck down Odomira and his kindred, and the people of Phazziron in their tents. Then he began to attack and went into battle with his forces, and Simon and his men sallied out from the town and set fire to the machines of war. They fought with Bacchides, and he was crushed by them. They pressed him very hard, for his plan and his expedition had been in vain. So he was very angry at the renegades who had counseled him to come into the country, and he killed many of them. Then he decided to go back to his own land. When Jonathan learned of this, he sent ambassadors to him to make peace with him and obtain release of the captives. He agreed and did as he said, and he swore to Jonathan that he would not try to harm him as long as he lived. He restored to him the captives whom he had taken previously from the land of Judah. Then he turned and went back to his own land and did not come again into their territory. Thus the sword ceased from Israel. Jonathan settled in Michmash and began to judge the people, and he destroyed the godless out of Israel. All right, first Maccabees 10. In the 160th year, Alexander Ephanes, son of Antiochus, landed and occupied Ptolemais. They welcomed him, and there he began to reign. When King Demetrius heard of it, he assembled a very large army and marched out to meet him in battle. Demetrius sent Jonathan a letter in peaceable words to honor him, for he said to himself, "Let us act first to make peace with him before he makes peace with Alexander against us. For he will remember all the wrongs that we did to him and to his brothers and his nation." So Demetrius gave him authority to recruit troops, to equip them with arms, and to become his ally. And he commanded that the hostages in the citadel should be released to him. Then Jonathan came to Jerusalem and read the letter in the hearing of all the people and of those in the citadel. They were greatly alarmed when they heard that the king had given him authority to recruit troops. But those in the citadel released the hostages of Jonathan, and he returned them to their parents. And Jonathan took up residence in Jerusalem and began to rebuild and restore. He directed those who were doing the work to build the walls and encircle Mount Zion with squared stones for better fortification, and they did so. Then the foreigners who were in the strongholds that Bachides had built fled. All of them left their places and went back to their own lands. Only in Bethzer did some remain who had forsaken the law and the commandments, for it served as a place of refuge. Now King Alexander heard of all the promises that Demetrius had sent to Jonathan, and he heard of the battles that Jonathan and his brothers had fought, and of the brave deeds that they had done, and of the troubles they had endured. So he said, "Shall we find another such man? Come now, we will make him our friend and ally." And he wrote a letter and sent it to him in the following words: "King Alexander, to his brother Jonathan, greetings. We have heard about you that you are a mighty warrior and worthy to be our friend. And so we have appointed you today to be the high priest of your nation. You are to be called the king's friend, and you are to take our side and keep friendship with us." He also sent him a purple robe and a golden crown. So Jonathan put on the sacred vestments in the seventh month of the 160th year at the festival of Booths, and he recruited troops and equipped them with arms in abundance. When Demetrius heard of these things, he was distressed and said, "What is this that we have done? Alexander has gotten ahead of us in forming a friendship with the Jews to strengthen himself. I also write them words of encouragement and promise them honor and gifts so that I may have their help." So he sent a message to them in the following words: "King Demetrius, to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since you have kept your agreement with us and have continued your friendship with us and have not sided with our enemies, we have heard of it and rejoiced. Now continue still to keep faith with us, and we will repay you with good for what you do for us. We will grant you many immunities and give you gifts. I now free you and exempt all the Jews from payment of tribute and salt tax and crown levies. And instead of collecting the third of the grain and the half of the fruit of the trees that I should receive, I release them from this day and henceforth. I will not collect them from the land of Judah or from the 3 districts added to it, from Samaria and Galilee, from this day and for all time. Jerusalem and its environs, its tithes and its revenues shall be holy and free from tax. I release all my control of the citadel in Jerusalem and give it to the high priest, so that he may station in it men of his own choice to guard it. And everyone of the Jews taken as a captive from the land of Judah into any part of my kingdom I set free without payment, and let all officials cancel also the taxes on their livestock. All the festivals and Sabbaths and new moons and appointed days and the 3 days before a festival and the 3 after a festival, let them all be days of immunity and release for all the Jews who are in my kingdom. No one shall have authority to exact anything from them or annoy any of them about any matter. Let Jews be enrolled in the king's forces to the number of 30,000 men, and let the maintenance be given them that is due to all the forces of the king. Let some of them be stationed in the great strongholds of the king, and let some of them be put in positions of trust in the kingdom. Let their officers and leaders be of their own number, and let them live by their own laws, just as the king has commanded in the land of Judah. As for the 3 districts that have been added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be annexed to Judea, so that they may be considered to be under one ruler and obey no other authority than the high priest. Ptolemaeus and the land adjoining it I have given as a gift to the sanctuary in Jerusalem to meet the necessary expenses of the sanctuary. I also grant 15,000 shekels of silver yearly out of the king's revenues from appropriate places, and all the additional funds that the government officials have not paid, as they did in the first years. They shall give from now on for the service of the temple. Moreover, the 5,000 shekels of silver that my officials have received every year from the income of the services of the temple, this too is canceled because it belongs to the priests who minister there. And all who take refuge at the temple in Jerusalem or in any of its precincts because they owe money to the king or are in debt, let them be released and receive back all their property in my kingdom. Let the cost of rebuilding and restoring the structures of the sanctuary be paid from the revenues of the king. And let the cost of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and fortifying it all around, and the cost of rebuilding the walls of Judea also be paid from the revenues of the king. When Jonathan and the people heard these words, they did not believe or accept them, because they remembered the great wrongs that Demetrius had done in Israel and how much he had oppressed them. They favored Alexander because he had been the first to speak peaceable words to them, and they remained his allies all his days. Now King Alexander assembled large forces and encamped opposite Demetrius. The two kings met in battle, and the army of Demetrius fled, and Alexander pursued him and defeated them. He pressed the battle strongly until the sun set, and on that day Demetrius fell. Then Alexander sent ambassadors to Ptolemy, king of Egypt, with the following message. Since I have returned to my kingdom and have taken my seat on the throne of my ancestors and established my rule, for I crushed Demetrius and gained control of our country. I met him in battle, and he and his army were crushed by us, and we have taken our seat on the throne of his kingdom. Now, therefore, let us establish friendship with one another. Give me now your daughter as my wife, and I will become your son-in-law, and will make gifts to you and to her in keeping with your position. Ptolemy the king replied and said, Happy was the day on which you returned to the land of your ancestors and took your seat on the throne of their kingdom. And now I will do for you as you wrote, but meet me at Ptolemais, so that we may see one another, and I will become your father-in-law as you have said. So Ptolemy set out from Egypt, he and his daughter Cleopatra, and came to Ptolemais in the 162nd year. King Alexander met him, and Ptolemy gave him his daughter Cleopatra in marriage and celebrated her wedding at Ptolemais with great pomp, as kings do. Then King Alexander wrote to Jonathan to come and meet him. So he went with pomp to Ptolemais and met the two kings. He gave them and their friends silver and gold and many gifts, and found favor with them. A group of malcontents from Israel, renegades, gathered together against him to accuse him, but the king paid no attention to them. The king gave orders to take off Jonathan's garments and to clothe him in purple, and they did so. The king also seated him at his side, and he said to his officers, Go out with him into the middle of the city and proclaim that no one is to bring charges against him about any matter, and let no one annoy him for any reason. When his accusers saw the honor that was paid him in accord with the proclamation and saw him clothed in purple, they all fled. Thus the king honored him and enrolled him among his chief friends and made him general and governor of the province. And Jonathan returned to Jerusalem in peace and gladness. In the 165th year, Demetrius, son of Demetrius, came from Crete to the land of his ancestors. When King Alexander heard of it, he was greatly distressed and returned to Antioch. And Demetrius appointed Apollonius, the governor of Coelesyria, and he assembled a large force and encamped against Jamnia. Then he sent the following message to the high priest Jonathan. You are the only one to rise up against us, and I have fallen into ridicule and disgrace because of you. Why do you assume authority against us in the hill country? If you now have confidence in your forces, come down to the plain to meet us, and let us match strength with each other there, for I have with me the power of the cities. Ask and learn who I am and who the others are that are helping us. People will tell you that you cannot stand before us, for your ancestors were twice put to flight in their own land. And now you will not be able to withstand my cavalry and such an army in the plain, where there is no stone or pebble or place to flee. When Jonathan heard the words of Apollonius, his spirit was aroused. He chose 10,000 men and set out from Jerusalem, and his brother Simon met him to help him. He camped before Joppa, but the people of the city closed its gates, for Apollonius had a garrison in Joppa. So they fought against it, and the people of the city became afraid and opened the gates, and Jonathan gained possession of Joppa. When Apollonius heard of it, he mustered 3,000 cavalry and a large army and went to Azotus as though he were going farther. At the same time, he advanced into the plain, for he had a large troop of cavalry and put confidence in it. Jonathan pursued him to Azotus, and the armies engaged in battle. Now Polonius had secretly left 1,000 cavalry behind them. Jonathan learned that there was an ambush behind him, for they surrounded his army and shot arrows at his men from early morning until late afternoon. But his men stood fast, as Jonathan had commanded, and the enemy's horses grew tired. Then Simon brought forward his force and engaged the phalanx in battle. For the cavalry was exhausted, they were overwhelmed by him and fled. And the cavalry was dispersed in the plain. They fled to Azotus and entered Beth Dagon, the temple of their idol, for safety. But Jonathan burned Azotus and the surrounding towns and plundered them, and the temple of Dagon and those who had taken refuge in it he burned with fire. The number of those who fell by the sword, with those burned alive, came to 8,000. Then Jonathan left there and encamped against Ascalon, and the people of the city came out to meet him with great pomp. He and those with him then returned to Jerusalem with a large amount of booty. When King Alexander heard of these things, he honored Jonathan still more, and he sent to him a golden buckle, such as it is the custom to give the kings of kinsmen. He also gave him Ekron and all its environs as his possession. All right, 1 Maccabees 11. Then the king of Egypt gathered great forces like the sand by the seashore and many ships, and he tried to get possession of Alexander's kingdom by trickery and add it to his own kingdom. He set out for Syria with peaceable words, and the people of the towns opened their gates to him and went to meet him. For King Alexander had commanded them to meet him, since he was Alexander's father-in-law. But when Ptolemy entered the towns, he stationed forces as a garrison in each town. When he approached Azotus, he showed him the burnt-out temple of Dagon, and Azotus and its suburbs destroyed, and the corpses lying about, and the charred bodies of those for whom Jonathan had burned in the war, for they had piled them in heaps along his route. They also told the king what Jonathan had done to throw blame on him, but the king kept silent. Jonathan met the king at Joppa with pomp, and they greeted one another and spent the night there. And Jonathan went with the king as far as the river called Euletherus. Then he returned to Jerusalem. So King Ptolemy gained control of the coastal cities as far as Seleucia by the sea, and he kept devising wicked designs against Alexander. He sent envoys to King Demetrius, saying, "Come, let us make a covenant with each other, and I will give you in marriage with my daughter, who was Alexander's wife, and you shall reign over your father's. And I regret that I gave him my daughter, for he has tried to." He threw blame on Alexander because he coveted his kingdom. So he took his daughter away from him and gave her to Demetrius. He was estranged from Alexander, and their enmity became manifest. Then Ptolemy entered Antioch and put on the crown of Asia. Thus he put 2 crowns on his head, the crown of Egypt and that of Asia. Now King Alexander was in Sicilia at that time, because the people of that region were in revolt. When Alexander heard of it, he came against him in battle. To Ptolemy marched out and met with him a strong force and put him to flight. So Alexander fled into Arabia to find protection there, and King Ptolemy was triumphant. Zabdiel, the Arab, cut off the head of Alexander and sent it to Ptolemy. But King Ptolemy died 3 days later, and his troops in the strongholds were killed by the inhabitants of the stronghold. So Demetrius became king in the 167th year. In those days, Jonathan assembled the Judeans to attack the citadel in Jerusalem, and he built many engines of war to use against it. But certain renegades who hated their nation went to the king and reported to him that Jonathan was besieging the citadel. When he heard this, he was angry, and as soon as he heard it, he set out and came to Ptolemy. And he wrote Jonathan not to continue the siege, but to meet him for a conference at Ptolemy as quickly as possible. When Jonathan heard this, he gave orders to continue the siege. He chose some of the elders of Israel and some of the priests and put himself in danger. For he went to the king at Ptolemy, taking silver and gold and clothing and numerous other gifts, and he won his favor. Although certain renegades of his nation kept making complaints against him, the king treated him as his predecessors had treated him. He exalted him in the presence of all his friends. He confirmed him in the high priesthood and in as many other honors as he had formerly had, and caused him to be reckoned among his chief friends. Then Jonathan asked the king to free Judea and the 3 districts of Samaria from tribute, and promised that him 300 talents. The king consented and wrote a letter to Jonathan about all these things. Its contents were as follows: King Demetrius, to his brother Jonathan, and to the nation of the Jews, greetings. This copy of the letter that we wrote concerning you to our kinsman Lasthenes we have written to you also, so that you may know what it says. King Demetrius, to his father Lasthenes, greetings. We have determined to do good to the nation of the Jews, who are our friends, and fulfill their obligations to us because of the goodwill they showed towards us. We have confirmed as their possession both the territory of Judea and the 3 districts of Apherima, and Lydda, and Rathmon. The latter, with all the region bordering them, were added to Judea from Samaria. To all those who offer sacrifice in Jerusalem, we have granted release from the royal taxes that the king formerly received from them each year, from the crops of the land and the fruit of the trees. And the other payments henceforth due to us of the tithes and the taxes due to us, and the salt pits and the crown taxes due to us. From all these we shall grant them release, and not one of these grants shall be canceled from this time on forever. Now therefore take care to make a copy of this, and let it be given to Jonathan, and put up in a conspicuous place on the holy mountain. When King Demetrius saw that the land was quiet before him, and that there was no opposition to him, he dismissed all his troops, all of them to their own homes, except the foreign troops that he had recruited from the islands of the nations. So all the troops who had served under his predecessors hated him. A certain Trypho had formerly been one of Alexander's supporters. He saw that all the troops were grumbling against Demetrius, so he went to Amalku, the Arab, who was bringing up Antiochus, the young son of Alexander, and insistently urged him to hand Antiochus over to him to become king in place of his father. He also reported to Amalku what Demetrius had done, and told of the hatred that the troops of Demetrius had for him, and he stayed there many days. Now Jonathan sent to King Demetrius the request that he remove the troops of the citadel from Jerusalem and the troops in the strongholds, for they kept fighting against Israel. And Demetrius sent this message back to Jonathan: Not only will I do these things for you and your nation, but I will confer great honor on you and your nation if I find an opportunity. Now then, you will do well to send me men who will help me, for all my troops have revolted. So Jonathan sent 3,000 stalwart men to him in Antioch, and when they came to the king rejoiced at their arrival. Then the people of the city assembled with the city to the number of 120,000, and they wanted to kill the king. But the king fled into the palace. Then the people of the city seized the man's streets of the city and began to fight. So the king called the Jews to his aid, and they all rallied around him, and then spread out through the city, and they killed on that day about 100,000. They set fire to the city and seized a large amount of spoil on that day and saved the king. When the people of the city saw that the Jews had gained control of the city as they pleased, their courage failed, and they cried out to the king with his entreaty: Grant us peace and make the Jews stop fighting against us and our city. And they threw down their arms and made peace. So the Jews gained glory in the sight of the king and of all the people in his kingdom, and they returned to Jerusalem with a large amount of spoil. So King Demetrius sat on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was quiet before him. But he broke his word about all that he had promised, and became estranged from Jonathan, and did not repay the favors that Jonathan had done him, but treated him very harshly. After this, Trypho returned, and with him the young boy Antiochus, who began to reign and put on the crown. All the troops that Demetrius had discharged gathered around him. They fought against Demetrius, and he fled and was routed. Trypho captured the elephants and gained control of Antioch. Then the young Antiochus wrote to Jonathan, saying, I confirm you in the high priesthood and set you over the 4 districts and make you one of the king's friends. He also sent him gold plate and a table service, and granted him the right to drink from gold cups and dress in purple and wear gold buckle. He appointed Jonathan's brother Simon governor from the ladder of Tyre to the borders of Egypt. Then Jonathan set out and traveled beyond the river and among the towns, and all the army of Syria gathered to him as allies. When he came to Ascalon, the people of the city met him and paid him honor. From there he went to Gaza, but the people of Gaza shut him out. So he besieged it and burned its suburbs with fire and plundered them. Then the people of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan, and he made peace with them and took the sons of their rulers as hostages and sent them to Jerusalem. And he passed through the country as far as Damascus. Then Jonathan heard that the officers of Demetrius had come to Kadesh in Galilee with a large army, intending to remove him from office. He went to meet them, but left his brother Simon in the country. Simon encamped before Beth-zur and fought against it for many days and hemmed it in. Then they asked him to grant them terms of peace, and he did so. He removed them from there, took possession of the town, and set a garrison over it. Jonathan and his army encamped by the waters of Gennesaret. Early in the morning, they marched to the plain of Hazor. And there in the plains, the army of the foreigners met him. They had set an ambush against him in the mountains, but they themselves met him face to face. Then the men in ambush emerged from their places and joined battle. All the men with Jonathan fled. Not one of them was left except Mattathias, son of Absalom, and Judas, son of Chalphi, commanders of the forces of the armies. Jonathan tore his clothes, put dust on his head, and prayed. Then he turned back to the battle against the enemy and routed them, and they fled. When his men who were fleeing saw this, they returned to him and joined him in the pursuit as far as Kadesh to their camp, and there they encamped. As many as 3,000 of the foreigners fell that day, and Jonathan returned to Jerusalem. All right, this is the last chapter, 1 Maccabees 12. Just give me a long one, guys. Okay, now when Jonathan saw that the time was favorable for him, he chose men and sent them to Rome to confirm and renew the friendship with them. He also sent letters to the same effect to the Spartans and to the other places. So they went to Rome and entered the Senate chamber and said, "The high priest Jonathan and the Jewish nation have sent us to renew the former friendship and alliance with them." And the Romans gave them letters to the people in every place, asking them to provide for the envoys safe conduct to the land of Judah. This is a copy of the letter that Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. The high priest Jonathan, the senate of the nation, the priests, and the rest of the Jewish people, to their brothers, the Spartans, greetings. Already in time past, a letter was sent to the high priest Onias from Arius, who was king among you, stating that you are brothers, as the appended copy shows. Onias welcomed the envoy with honor and received the letter, which contained a clear declaration of alliance and friendship. Therefore, though we have no need of these things, since we have as encouragement the holy books that are in our hands, we have undertaken to send to renew our family ties and friendship with you, so that we may not become estranged from you. For considerable time has passed since you sent your letter to us. We therefore remember you constantly on every occasion, both at our festivals and on other appropriate days, at the sacrifices that we offer, and in our prayers, as it is right and proper to remember brothers, and we rejoice in your glory. But as for ourselves, many trials and many wars have encircled us. The kings around us have waged war against us. We were unwilling to annoy you and our other allies and friends with these wars, for we have the help that comes from heaven for our aid. And so we were delivered from our enemies, and our enemies were humbled. We therefore have chosen Numenius, son of Antiochus, and Antipater, son of Jason, and have sent them to Rome to renew our former friendship and alliance with them. We have commanded them to go also to you and greet you and deliver to you this letter from us concerning the renewal of our family ties. And now please send us a reply to this. This is a copy of the letter that they sent to Onias, King Arius of the Spartans, to the high priest Onias, greetings. It has been found in writing concerning the Spartans and the Jews that they are brothers and are the family of Abraham. And now we have learned this. Please write us concerning your welfare. We, on our part, write to you that your livestock and your property belong to us, and ours belong to you. We therefore command that our envoys report to you accordingly. Now Jonathan heard that the commanders of Demetrius had returned with a larger force than before to wage war against them. So he marched away from Jerusalem and met them in the region of Hamath, for he gave them an opportunity to invade his own country. He sent spies to their camp, and they returned and reported to him that the enemy were in formation to attack the Jews by night. So when the sun had set, Jonathan commanded his troops to be alert and to keep their arms at hand so as to be ready all night for battle, and he stationed outposts around the camp. When the enemy heard that Jonathan and his troops were prepared for battle, they were afraid and were terrified at heart. So they kindled fires in their camp and withdrew. But Jonathan and his troops did not know it until morning, for they saw the fires burning. Then Jonathan pursued them, but he did not overtake them, for they had crossed the Euphrates River. So Jonathan returned aside against the Arabs, who are called Zabadenes, and he crushed them and plundered them. Then he broke camp and went to Damascus and marched through all that region. Simon also went out and marched through the country as far as Ascalon and the neighboring strongholds. He turned aside to Joppa and took it by surprise, for he had heard that they were ready to hand over the stronghold to those whom Demetrius had sent, and he stationed a garrison there to guard it. When Jonathan returned, he convened the elders of the people and planned with them to build strongholds in Judea, to build the walls of Jerusalem still higher, and to erect a high barrier between the citadel and the city to separate it from the city, in order to isolate it so that its garrison could neither buy nor sell. So they gathered together to rebuild the city. Part of the wall on the valley to the east had fallen, and he repaired the section called Chaphenetha. Simon also built Adida in the Shephelah. He fortified it and installed gates with bolts. Then Trypho attempted to become king in Asia and put on the crown and to raise his hand against King Antiochus. He feared that Jonathan might not permit him to do so, but might make war on him. So he kept seeking to seize and kill him, and he marched out and came to Bethshan. Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 picked warriors, and he came to Bethshan. When Trypho saw that he had come with a large army, he was afraid to raise his hand against him. So he received him with honor and commended him to all his friends, and he gave him gifts and commanded his friends and his troops to obey him as they would himself. Then he said to Jonathan, "Why have you put all these people to so much trouble when we are not at war? Dismiss them now to their homes and choose for yourself a few men to stay with you and come with me to Ptolemais. I will hand it over to you, as well as the other strongholds and the remaining troops and all the officials, and will turn around and go home, for that is why I'm here." Jonathan trusted him and did as he said. He sent away the troops, and they returned to the land of Judah. He kept with himself 3,000 men, 2,000 of whom he left in Galilee, while 1,000 accompanied him. But when Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the people of Ptolemais closed the gates and seized him, and they killed with the sword all who had entered with him. Then Trypho sent troops and cavalry into Galilee and the Great Plain to destroy all Jonathan's soldiers. But they realized that Jonathan had been seized and had perished along with his men, and they encouraged one another and kept marching in close formation, ready for battle. When their pursuers saw that they would fight for their lives, they turned back. So they all reached the land of Judah safely, and they mourned for Jonathan and his companions and were in great fear, and all Israel mourned deeply. All the nations around them tried to destroy them, for they said, "They have no leader or helper, and now therefore let us make war on them and blot out the memory of them from humankind." All right, guys, that's it. 1 Maccabees 9 through 12. We'll do 1 Maccabees 13 next time. Bye.